Imagine a remote settlement deep in the jungles of Guyana, where nearly 1,000 people lived in what they believed was a utopia, until one fateful day, when everything spiraled into a nightmare of epic proportions. This is the story of Jonestown, the deadliest cult tragedy in modern history. To understand Jonestown, we need to know about the man who created it, Jim Jones. Born in Indiana in 1931, Jim Jones was an unusual child. He was obsessed with religion and death. As he grew up, he became a preacher, but he didn't preach a typical message. He talked about racial equality, justice, and creating a better world. Jones was a charismatic speaker who drew thousands of followers. He called his group the People's Temple. He promised a community where everyone was treated equally, regardless of race or background. But there was a darker side to Jones that his followers didn't see at first. By the early 1970s, the People's Temple had branches in several U.S. cities, and Jim Jones had a loyal following. Many saw him as a savior. He was praised for his commitment to helping the poor and standing up against racism. But Jones started to change. He became more controlling, more paranoid. He began to fear that the U.S. government and the media were after him. Jones decided the only way to protect his followers was to leave the United States. In 1974, he moved hundreds of his followers to the jungles of Guyana. He called the new settlement Jonestown. He promised it would be a safe haven, a paradise free from oppression. At first, Jonestown seemed like a dream come true. It was a community where everyone worked together. People farmed the land, built their own houses, and shared everything they had. But soon, cracks began to show. Jones controlled every part of life in Jonestown. He spoke over loudspeakers day and night, preaching fear of outside enemies. He became paranoid and erratic. Followers worked long hours in the hot sun, often with little food. Armed guards watched their every move. Jones held white night drills rehearsals for mass suicide. Followers were woken in the middle of the night, given drinks, and told it was poison. Jones would then tell them it was just a test. These drills were meant to scare and control them, breaking down their will to resist. By 1978, troubling reports from Jonestown were making headlines in the United States. Family members of those in the People's Temple were worried. They had received disturbing letters and phone calls from their loved ones, and some had even escaped, telling stories of forced labor, psychological abuse, and people being held against their will. Congressman Leo Ryan, known for his hands-on approach and commitment to human rights, decided to see Jonestown for himself. On November 14, 1978, Congressman Ryan, along with a delegation of journalists, concerned relatives, and his staff, arrived in Guyana. At first, the People's Temple leadership resisted, saying that the visit would be disruptive and that Ryan's presence was not welcome. But under increasing pressure, Jim Jones reluctantly agreed to allow Ryan and his delegation to visit Jonestown. On November 17, 1978, Ryan and his group were flown to Port Kaituma, the nearest airstrip to Jonestown. From there, they were driven into the settlement. At first, everything seemed calm. The visitors were welcomed warmly, and there were smiles, music, and speeches about how wonderful life was in Jonestown. Members of the People's Temple put on a show, singing songs and praising Jim Jones, hoping to convince the outsiders that all was well. But behind the smiles, there was tension. Ryan and the others noticed that some of the residents seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact or whispering when Jones and his loyalists were not around. That night, during a dinner hosted by the temple, members began slipping notes to the journalists and Ryan's team, begging for help to leave Jonestown. One note read, "Please help us get out of Jonestown." Over the next few hours, more people quietly approached Ryan's team, asking to leave. They spoke of fear, intimidation, and being trapped in the jungle with no way out. By the next day, November 18, the situation had escalated. Ryan announced that anyone who wished to leave with him could do so. About 15 people, including several children, decided to go, but the atmosphere was growing more tense by the minute. Jones, seeing his control slipping, grew agitated. He spoke to his followers with increasing desperation, trying to convince them to stay. As Ryan and his group prepared to leave, a temple member suddenly attacked Ryan with a knife. Ryan was unharmed, and the attacker was subdued, but it was clear that the situation was becoming dangerous. Ryan decided to take as many people as possible to safety immediately. They headed back to the airstrip, a small, dusty clearing where two small planes waited. As the group waited to board, a truck carrying temple gunmen arrived. Without warning, they opened fire, spraying bullets into the group. Congressman Ryan was shot multiple times and killed, along with 3 journalists and a defecting temple member. Others were wounded or managed to flee into the jungle, terrified and desperate to survive. The attack on Congressman Ryan's group was just the beginning. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones had gathered his followers for what he called their final act of defiance. The worst was yet to come. In the wake of the attack on Congressman Ryan, Jim Jones convinced his followers that death was their only escape from the impending doom. He framed the mass death as a revolutionary act, meant to defy the oppressive forces he believed were coming for them. The term revolutionary suicide was used to present their deaths as a form of protest, rather than a surrender. Jones gathered everyone in the main pavilion. His speech was filled with a mix of paranoia and desperation. He told them that the only way to ensure their safety and preserve their dignity was to die together. The mood was tense, with many followers visibly anxious and confused. Some were already crying, while others were too stunned to react. Large vats of poison were prepared, flavor aid mixed with cyanide, tranquilizers, and other drugs. The poison was distributed in pitchers, and followers were instructed to drink. Jones made it clear that there was no escape from this fate. Those who hesitated or resisted were forced at gunpoint. The process was horrific. Parents were made to give the poisoned drink to their children first. Some tried to comfort their kids, their faces filled with tears. Others accepted their fate with stoic silence. Having been conditioned to trust Jones completely, the air was filled with the sounds of crying and desperate pleas as the poison began to take effect. As the poison took hold, convulsions and gasping became common. The screams and cries of the dying filled the air. Some attempted to flee but were quickly subdued by armed guards who were tasked with ensuring that no one escaped. The scene was chaotic and tragic, with people collapsing in agony. Jim Jones himself was found dead in the pavilion. He had a gunshot wound to the head, believed to be either self-inflicted or administered by a close aide. His final moments were spent addressing his followers, urging them to stay calm and die with dignity. His voice, once full of charisma, now carried the weight of a grim reality. By the end of the day, more than 900 people were dead. Over 300 were children. The scene was one of utter devastation. The settlement, once bustling with life, was now eerily silent, filled with the lifeless bodies of those who had trusted Jones until the very end. In the aftermath, a few survivors managed to escape into the dense jungle, their lives forever changed by the unimaginable events they had witnessed. The mass suicide at Jonestown stands as a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of blind loyalty. The tragedy of Jonestown shocked the world. How could this happen? How could one man convince so many to die? Survivors spoke of fear, manipulation, and mind control. They talked about a leader who preyed on their hopes and fears. Jonestown is a warning, a reminder of what can happen when people surrender their freedom to a charismatic leader. It teaches us to be cautious of anyone who demands total loyalty and control. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of the unexplained and the macabre. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that are true. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.